This is the most unique way of appearing in Vikings, which sharply contrasts with Athelstan's weakness. He is Bishop Heahmund, holding scriptures in one hand and a sword in the other. Before this, he was officiating a funeral for a deceased man whose wife was absorbed in the pain of losing her husband. So Haymon used a special way to relieve her pain, with a sword standing in the corner of the bed. After Ecgbert's fall, the Vikings began celebrating amidst the ruins of Wessex. They defeated 2 kingdoms in England, with Ragnar's 5 sons playing a pivotal role. Not only that, but they also gained large swathes of legal land in England. For the Vikings, this was a great victory. Bjorn gave a passionate speech, but victory was followed by division. Bjorn's pursuit went beyond that. He wanted to continue exploring unknown territories on a wider sea. Ivar's ambition was also exposed at this moment. He told everyone that he stayed not for farming, but to make good use of their efficient army to take over even more land. He said that people who shared his ambitions should choose to follow him because no one could stop them now.
Who can stand in our way now?
Ivar's words displeased Ubbi, who stated that Ivar wasn't fit to lead the army. But Ivar didn't see it the same way. He believed Ubbi lacked the courage to fight and take risks. The Vikings, being naturally warlike, were thrilled at the prospect of continuous plundering. Sigurd advised Ivar not to create divisions, stating that they were all Ragnar's sons and should stand united. But Ivar didn't care what he said. Then Sigurd directly mentioned Ivar's physical defects, and the atmosphere became tense. Harald tactfully diffused the situation, stating that he had other arrangements and would lead a team back to the Nordic countries. Halfdan, on the other hand, was willing to follow Bjorn to explore unknown lands farther away. As fewer and fewer people stayed behind, Ivar became increasingly anxious. Eagerly, Ivar stated that those remaining could follow him, but Sigurd countered, saying that he didn't want to follow Ivar. This led to an argument where Sigurd mocked Ivar for his inability to walk, and even asserted that only their dead mother genuinely loved him.
No, I guess it must be hard for you now that your mum is dead, knowing she's the only one who ever really loved you.
Enraged, Ivar hurled his weapon at Sigurd, who fell in front of everyone. His actions made the Vikings question him, but he had no intention of repenting. He only explained to the crowd that everything turned out this way because Sigurd mocked him. However, his other brothers were unmoved. In desperation, he left them to find Floki. Upon finding Floki, Ivar discovered that he was building a boat for himself. Helga's departure made half his life's war meaningless. He wanted to wander alone to seek the will of the gods. Ivar said that he did not want to kill Sigurd because he was his brother. But his brothers didn't believe him, and Ivar told Floki that he was lonely. Floki held Ivar in his arms and said that Ivar didn't need him. No matter how Ivar pleaded, he couldn't change Floki's decision. Having undergone a series of setbacks, Ivar became crazier and more brutal. Soon after, Bjorn and Floki left England due to their respective goals and pursuits, leaving behind Ubba, Ivar, and Hvitserk. The three began to discuss their future plans. Ubbi wanted to settle on the land they had ceded from Ecgbert. He wanted to fulfill their father Ragnar's dream so that the Vikings could live and work in peace there. However, Ivar disagreed with his ideas. He pointed out that the land promised by Ecgbert was located deep inside England, making them easy targets for encirclement. So Ivar planned to return to the kingdom of Northumbria, looking for a place near the coastline to build an impregnable base. This plan would facilitate their attacks or retreats. He already had a target, the town of York. Hvitserk agreed with this plan, and Ubbi had no choice but to accept Ivar's proposal. Then, they led the Viking army to the outskirts of Yorktown. Ubbi learned about the Christian holiday habits from Ragnar. When Christians gather in the church for worship, their defenses are weakest, making it the best time for attack. So, they caught 2 children and quickly learned from them that Ascension Day would be in 3 days. Ivar was satisfied with their answer. However, from this point on, Ivar's brutality appeared. He planned to sacrifice these 2 innocent children. Under Ivar's leadership, the Vikings became more ruthless. Watching this, Ubbi felt somewhat helpless and quietly left the crowd. Meanwhile, Haymon led a team of knights to the capital of Wessex. However, the city had already become ruins. Despite this, he ordered the search for the body of the king. Eventually, a soldier found Ecgbert's body in a barrel. Haymon, looking at the ruins in front of him, commanded everyone to start cleaning up the place and had the soldiers inform the refugees to return. After some sorting, Haymon held a funeral for the king. Then, a priest found Haymon. He was curious how the priest managed to escape the Viking massacre. So the priest told him about what happened after the Vikings invaded. Haymon was angry that Ecgbert had ceded England's land. However, the priest told him that this was actually a strategy by King Ecgbert. Before making the agreement with the Vikings, the king had passed on the throne to Ethelwulf, so his promise of land to the Vikings was actually invalid. At this time, Ethelwulf, in order to evade the Viking pursuit, led the people of Wessex into a swamp. Due to the harsh conditions, Alfred fell ill. Before long, a section of the population returned to Wessex. Among them was a woman who expressed her gratitude to Heahmund. However, Haymon could see from her eyes that she still seemed to want consolation from the archbishop. Torvi and Guthrum were training. Guthrum is the son of Torvi and Earl Borg. As the two were talking, an alarm rang in Kattegat. It turns out that Harald returned to Kattegat and reported to Lagertha the situation in England. He didn't know that his collaboration with Egil to raid Kattegat was exposed. When Lagertha asked him if there was anything he forgot to say, Harald understood instantly. Harald realized he could no longer fight against Lagertha. After Lagertha caught Harald, she did not kill him, but had him beaten and locked up. Lagertha curiously asked Harald why he coveted her throne. Harald said that the reason he wanted to snatch Lagertha's throne was for his sweetheart. To marry the princess, he decided to become the king of Norway. However, in the end, he discovered that the princess had deceived him and married a count. Immediately, he killed those two and now had no interest in Kattegat. Harald stated that since Bjorn had left Kattegat, if Aslog's children returned, they would surely seek revenge on her. So he expressed his desire to form an alliance with Lagertha. After hearing what he said, Lagertha asked Harald what he wanted from their alliance. Harald expressed that he was missing a woman and Lagertha was lacking a man. Their relationship could be complementary. Their alliance quickly turned into a marriage. When Lagertha announced this news to those around her, Astrid couldn't accept Lagertha's decision. However, Lagertha insisted on not listening to persuasions, and eventually, Astrid left in resentment. Soon after Astrid left, she was captured by Harald's men. It turned out that Harald escaped when the guards were lax, and he took Astrid with him. With Harald escaping and Astrid missing, Lagertha realized she had been tricked by Harald. Harald told Astrid that he still wanted to be the king of Norway, but he wanted a queen. It turns out that Harald captured Astrid because he wanted her to be his queen. Harald had a high reputation in his territory, and he introduced Astrid to everyone. With the endorsement of the crowd, Astrid sat next to Harald. Afterward, Harald arranged a guard to watch over Astrid. She put on the clothes and ornaments prepared by Harald and attended the banquet held by Harald. On the other hand, Floki, who was wandering alone, didn't know how long he had been drifting at sea. All the things Ivar had left him to tell, time and direction, were thrown into the sea. He could only rely on the ravens to find land. As he was waiting for the news from the ravens, a storm came. He completely gave up resisting, but the gods did not take his life. When he woke up the next day, a new land appeared before him. He started to explore this unfamiliar place and finally came to a waterfall. Meanwhile, calamity fell on the town of York when the townsfolk were worshipping in the church. Their defenses were ineffective, and Ubi scaled the city wall with his bare hands. Soon, he opened the gates of York. Led by Ivar, the Vikings killed on sight in the streets of York. Facing the feeble Christians, the Vikings quickly finished their slaughter. They arrived at the church successfully, but what awaited these Christians was a ruthless massacre. This scene seems familiar, like the scene where Ragnar looted Winchester Cathedral. The current Ubi was like Ragnar in those days, not killing on sight like the others. Facing the brutality of the tribe, he was even somewhat troubled. At this time, Ivar came to the church. His hatred for Christianity was in his bones. Watching this, Ivar looked excited. Perhaps in his heart, the slaughter was for his own pleasure. At this time, Yorktown had been occupied by the Vikings. Afterward, Ubi and Hvitserk prepared to find Ivar to discuss the next plan, but they were stopped by the guards. Ivar's status among the Vikings was getting higher and higher, but Ubi directly used his identity to suppress the guard and then walked in. Even though Ivar didn't admit that he arranged the guard to guard against his brothers, his heart had long been wanting to take power. Ethelwulf seems to have not received the notice from Haymon, and he still lives in the dilapidated town. However, Alfred seemed already gravely ill. He came alone to the water and even had hallucinations. He saw a monk in a black robe standing in front of him, but he couldn't make out the man's face. Under the gaze of Ethelwulf and his wife, Alfred fell into the water. Ethelwulf responded quickly and pulled Alfred up. After he spat out a few mouthfuls of dirty water, Alfred gradually regained consciousness. He felt as if he had received a divine mandate.
We must get to York.
Why must we go to York?
The Northmen are there.
The Northmen?
And your people need you.
How did you know?
My father told me.
Every time when Haymon finished consoling others, he would run to a thorny area. As the Archbishop of England, he felt a huge sense of guilt while bringing comfort to others. But there was no choice. There were too many people in England who needed him. Soon, someone reported that the Vikings had captured York and killed the bishop there in a most brutal way. Haymon was furious and wanted to take revenge on the Vikings. He soon led his troops to the outskirts of York. A soldier reported the situation in the city to him, telling him the Vikings were repairing and improving the city's defenses. Looking at their fortifications, they currently didn't have enough power to attack the Vikings. If the new king is here, he will definitely be able to recruit more warriors. If the king personally leads the expedition, he will have a greater chance of winning. After receiving Athelstan's revelation, King Ethelwulf regrouped his army, and Alfred's disease miraculously healed. Under the leadership of Ethelwulf, they headed for York. Soon they arrived at Haymon's camp, and the archbishop personally welcomed him. After some pleasantries, they got down to business. After all, the Vikings were their common target. Haymon reported what they had scouted to Ethelwulf. They had found a defensive loophole in York. There was an old wall that was in disrepair which seemed to have been overlooked by the Vikings. Ethelwulf couldn't wait to launch an attack after hearing this. However, Haymon thought otherwise. He believed that the top priority was to gather more strength. Judith suggested they could contact the old troops from Northumbria. Once everything was ready, they could launch an attack on the Vikings. Ivar and his men seemed oblivious to this.
Remain unguarded.
At this moment, Ivar had a blacksmith make a set of gear for him because he wanted to be able to walk like a normal person. Unexpectedly, he miraculously stood up. The next day, a subordinate brought an English slave in front of Ivar. As it turned out, Ivar already knew about the English army's assembly. He planned to sacrifice her to the gods before the war. However, the maid was exceptionally calm and stated that she was willing to do anything for Ivar. The maid thought Ivar was interested in her, so she approached Ivar. Clearly, she didn't know about Ivar's physical condition. She said that Ivar was chosen by the gods, so he was disabled because Ivar was destined to achieve something big. After hearing the maiden's words, Ivar's mood improved instantly. He immediately freed the maid from her slave status. Although the sacrifices that needed to be offered were gone, war with the English was unavoidable. 2 spies in the English military camp came to report that the Vikings had indeed neglected the dilapidated ancient city wall in Yorktown. Once the information was confirmed, Ethelwulf was full of confidence and ordered an attack on the Vikings in York. Alfred also joined this battle. At dawn, they quietly infiltrated York. Just when the English thought their plan was flawless, Ivar had seen through everything. At this moment, he was looking down on all the moves of the English from the top of the tower. The so-called defensive loophole was a trap. However, Ethelwulf was oblivious to this. Even though thick smoke was everywhere, he still ordered his troops to advance into the city. When they reached an alley, they were completely surrounded by thick smoke, unable to see the way ahead. Would they become lambs to the slaughter? And what would await them next?